Max Sisulu, you were one of the former speakers of parliament.
Yeah.
Now, clearly, if one becomes a person in such an important position, which is the one of the spheres of government, there's a history, a long history before that, of political activity, but also involved in social movements, in particular against apartheid, given the South African context. Give us a sense of your early years, Max Sisulu, as a young person, and then what propelled you to get into politics against the apartheid state? In fact, to overthrow the apartheid state.
Well, I was born in Soweto, I was the eldest of 5 children. That is myself, my 2 late brothers, Mlungisi Zwelakhe, Lindy, the minister, and Nkululeko. Later, we were joined by 2 of our cousins whose mother had died, so they stayed with us. So we had a fairly big family, and we lived in Soweto, so the house was always full of people. Not only the family, my grandmother was staying with us and my aunt was staying with us. And this was a 4-bedroomed house. But the house was also full of police all the time, coming to search a house and, and also part of harassment. Then my mom was a nurse, so the house was always full of people coming either for medical treatment. My mom was also a midwife. She had to go and help, deliver children. And then there was also the political family. Mandela was in and out of the house. Oliver Tambo, and there were meetings, of course, of ANC meetings, mostly in the evening. So people coming from different parts of Johannesburg, and we as kids were always out to secure the cars. And so the meetings would go on, sometimes for a long time. So we lived in a house that was always a busy house, a full house. And so we remember the house with fondness, because I left from that house for Exile. My mom and I also left from that house to go to jail. And also Zwelakhe, Mlungisi, all my family has been to jail at different times, of course. So we all came out of that house, and so it's an important landmark for us. Also in Soweto, we always want to go back to the house, remember the past where we come from, but also to remember that actually a lot of the changes that took place, the fight against apartheid, was also planned from that house, the entire ANC leadership. So we hoping to turn this house into a museum of some sort, historical museum. Also the gardens, and we had a big garden, and at some point we used the garden to bury the banned books, because police came at different times to looking for these books to search the house. So after a while we forgot where the books were buried, and especially after I left. Yes. So we had to start a project of digging up to find some of the books. Some were found, others of course we couldn't find. But so yes, the house has a history, so that's where we come from, and that was our home. So the important thing about the house in Soweto is not just that we were born there, grew up there, was also my grandmother was a very good person around, when we're distributing leaflets at night, when we're doing all sorts of things, slogan painting. Thabo Mbeki also was there, part of the slogan painting group. And my grandmother mobilized all the young people and would go out at night to distribute leaflets and pamphlets. And my grandmother wouldn't sleep until we all got back home, and she would count us. and say, one is missing. Let's go and look for that one. And that was my grandmother. My grandmother also ran a feeding scheme program in Shanty Town in Soweto. And basically it was giving almost free bread and skimmed milk, which was donated. So she ran that feeding scheme very, very well. And so she was popular because of that. And of course it was almost free.
Tell us, you're saying that part of your responsibilities at the time when the elders met, at the time they were also obviously young men, Walter Sisulu, Nelson Mandela, and Oar Tambo met in the house, and others. You were one of those children that were given the responsibility to look after the cars. What did that symbolize for you at the time, to look after the cars?
Well, for two reasons. We looked after the cars, but also it was to give a warning if there was any police special branch coming, because a lot of cars in Soweto would draw attention, obviously. So it was not just to protect the cars, because nobody would dare come and take the cars from that ANC environment, but it was also to be on the lookout, so that if we thought police were coming, then we'd give the warning that the police coming and that kind of thing, because at that time my father was also not allowed to talk to more than 2 or 3 people and that kind of thing. So it was both for security and protection.
Why do the Sisulu family, as an extremely important family in the political landscape of South African society, but also in terms of its own outlook, in terms of Africa in the world, why does the Sisulu family have difficulty to talk about yourselves and the role that you have played in the public space?
Well, we come from the tradition where you really don't talk about yourself. You talk about the issues, you talk about the struggle, you talk about other people. We never were taught to promote ourselves. Actually, it's not really an African culture to promote yourself except now. In the past, you promoted the issues, the struggle, or religion, whatever it was, but never oneself. Secondly, we never thought it was important to talk about the individuals. It was important to talk about the issues. It was important to talk about the struggle. It was important to talk about that which unites us, not that which divides us. It was important just to chart the way forward. And so that's how we grew up. And also when we went as young pioneers, Dumanokwe, to digress a bit, started what was called the Young Pioneers, Masupatsila. It was started by Dumanokwe. He got the idea when he and Tata Walter Sisulu were traveling abroad in Eastern Europe, everywhere. And so they saw the importance of starting pioneers young so they grow into the struggle. And so our home was also a home for Masupatsila. And so where they were molded, Hutchinson used to write poetry. We also had participated in a play called 2005 that was looking into the future to say what will happen when freedom comes. So this was part of the struggle of teaching youngsters that there is nothing impossible. And in fact, we were even told to dream the impossible dream of freedom. At the time, it seemed impossible. But it later became not just possible, but doable and achievable.
The whole family being under police, continuously being harassed by the police. All your peers being either detained, arrested by the South African security police. Surely many families would be very angry. Why isn't there any signals from the Sisulu family of being angry about what has happened to the family itself?
Well, we were all arrested at one time or the other. I was arrested when I was a teenager, and together with my mom, because they were looking for my dad, who was underground. So we were detained, part as, inflicting pain on the family and on my father. And so we grew up knowing that we had to fight to get what we wanted to achieve, which is freedom. We knew that freedom would not come easy. We knew that freedom was not something that is given to you as a gift. Freedom is your right and you fight for it. And we were prepared to fight for it, mobilize for it, and we did fight for it. And we're happy that we achieved that freedom in our lifetime. In Tata's lifetime, in Mama's lifetime, in our lifetime. So we succeeded. The system failed. We achieved what we sought to achieve, and they failed to achieve, continued repression and maintaining the system of apartheid.
For a youngster listening to this interview, what do you mean by they failed, we succeeded? Can you just, because it's two different positions that you take.
We, the oppressed people, succeeded in achieving what we fought for, freedom. Many people died for freedom. Freedom didn't come easy, it didn't come cheap. People died for it. There were massacres, Soweto, Sharpeville, people fighting Langa. These were all people fighting for their rights to live as human beings in the land of their birth. And some of them were young people. Soweto uprising, young people were killed. So we as a people, we as fighters for freedom, succeeded in achieving what we fought for, and some of our people died for, which is freedom. It is a right of every human being. But in South Africa, it was denied us, the blacks, that freedom. So we're not going to ask for it. We're going to fight for it, which is what we did. I was detained, my mom was detained, all members of the family at one time or the other were detained. We know prison, we know the conditions. I left for Exile when I was very young to join Umkhonto weSizwe so that I could train, come back and fight for this freedom. So from that perspective, we as an oppressed people succeeded to destroy apartheid. And they, despite their power, military, whatever, they failed to continue to suppress the people.
Your family is still not bitter. Why do you think there's not a bitterness in the Sisulu family against those who were the principals and the supporters of the apartheid system at the time?
Well, of course, we continue to hate oppression, wherever it comes from. We hate to see people suffering anywhere in the world. We are moved by those who fought for freedom in different parts of the world. We celebrated the Cuban Revolution, we celebrated all the revolutions where the oppressed people fought and succeeded. And for us, the important thing was not just about us as a family. The important thing was the vision that united us, not just a family, but also the people of the country and the people of the world. The struggle against apartheid became an international symbol for fighting for freedom anywhere and everywhere in the world. We succeeded as a people. International support for our struggle grew from every day. So apartheid was seen not just as an evil thing, but something that had to be fought against. Again, we, as part of the international community, succeeded. So we can't be bitter about succeeding. We are happy to be part of that struggle that fought and succeeded in bringing about the change that we wanted. We were taught at an early age by my dad and Tumanoke that change, any change comes about as a result of action. So you need to decide what kind of action to take in order to bring about the desired results. So we were part of that force of action to bring about the desired result, which is freedom, democracy in our country. And we also were internationalists. We supported the freedoms of other people in other countries, not just in our country, because we were supported by everybody. We continue to support those who need our support.
You in exile, clearly as a young person, who influenced and helped shape the Walter Sisulu's children like yourself in exile?
Well, I went to exile as about 19-year-old after I was released from jail. And I joined Mkhonto Wesizwe. And we went first to Botswana, Gaborone. There was a refugee camp there. And where many people went to. Botswana was an important place where young people were leaving the country, not just from South Africa, from Zimbabwe, then from Namibia. And we're grateful that at the time Botswana gave us the refuge they gave us. And so we were living from Botswana to different parts, in our case to Tanzania. And so we were waiting for a plane to pick us up. And so the night before, we were supposed to leave, there was jubilation, of course, so we'd never been on a plane before, and we were going to be flying to Tanzania. We'd never seen Tanzania, and we'd been in the camp for a while eating, pap and baked beans. So after a while, it gets to be quite monotonous and boring. And so we were looking forward to the change and also looking forward to going to do military training. So as we were waiting for the plane, we saw the plane land. And we were so excited, because we were not far from the airfield. The camp was not far from the airfield where the planes were landing and taking off. So what happened at, I think, 4 o'clock in the morning, we couldn't sleep. We knew that at 6 or 7 we'd be leaving. They blew up the plane. And we saw the plane, in flames, just 2 hours before we left. And that was it.
Who's they that blew up the plane?
That must be the enemy agents, Apartheid. Mm-hmm. They were the only ones to benefit from blowing up the plane. We were only grateful that the plane blew up on the ground, not in the air, when all of us would have been on the plane. So that was, of course, a blessing in disguise, but also it showed that the apartheid regime would stop at nothing to protect itself and also to kill. There have been, many of our people have died at home and abroad, killed by the apartheid system. So we were prepared to die for freedom. And all of us were young, keen, and ready to join Mkhonto Wesizwe, which we did. I joined Mkhonto Wesizwe at a very young age, and I continued to be a member of Mkhonto Wesizwe even when we came back home. So the struggle became our life. The struggle became us, and we became part of that struggle. Even today, we fight for democracy. We fight to make sure that the quality of life of the ordinary person improves. That's what we promise in the Freedom Charter. And therefore, that is still part of our vision and mission.
So in exile, who were those leaders that influence your outlook as a young person at the age of 19, joining Mkhonto Wesizwe, but also be part of the African National Congress's political program?
Well, we had outstanding leaders like Oliver Tambo, president of the ANC, Dumanoke was there at the time. Moses Mabida, Kotane, J.B. Marx, Dan Klume. Yeah, we had quite a lot of very good leaders. And the struggle, of course, produces its own leaders all the time. It was regenerating all the time. Later on, also people like Begi became important leaders of the ANC. So the ANC had this capacity to, renew itself all the time. So we had outstanding leaders, but the idea was that each individual must himself or herself be a leader. That's what we were taught, because we were going to go back home and lead the struggle. And therefore, each person had to be a leader. What did it mean? It meant you had to do two things. You had to be able to carry a gun, and we trained as soldiers, military people, guerrillas. But each soldier must be a politician. So we became politicians carrying guns. We became students and scholars. Students, we learned, we went to different places, and we learned different skills, and we trained doctors, and we trained people in different skills, because we knew we were going to go back home and the skills were needed. But important, as we were training, we ourselves were learning. There's no end to learning. And so we continued to learn, and we continued to teach. It was both teaching and learning at the same time.
Altogether, how many years did you spend in exile?
Oh, at some point I spent more years in exile than I spent in the country. I left when I was about 18. And so I spent close to almost 20 years in exile, more than 15 years in any case. Because I did my military training twice under Joe Mudise in Odessa. And then after completing that, we did a officer's course, Thabo Mbeki and a few others in the Soviet Union. And then after completing that, I trained at the university. I became an economist. I trained as an economist. And we came back, and in Tanzania, we headed up the youth and students movement of the ANC. We also trained a lot of people who were coming after the Soweto uprisings. And so they came to exile in Tanzania, Botswana, and we're responsible for the logistics and responsible for upkeep and training. And so, yes, training was a constant and continual project that we're involved in.
So you came back after in exile, you were in exile, and then you came back into the country.
Yeah.
That moment when you set back foot in South Africa after the unbanning of the African National Congress, South African Communist Party, and all liberation movements, what went through your mind that day when you came back into South Africa? And which year was it? Because many people came different times of that period since 2nd February 1990.
Well, maybe to take a step back, before coming back home, we received the ANC leadership in Lusaka. Tata was there, and my mother I hadn't seen for many, many years. And Governor Beki and all the entire ANC leadership came to Lusaka. And we were obviously, just overwhelmed to see people we hadn't seen. And also to prove a point that, those who fight for freedom don't die, they die after freedom. So Harry Gwala was there. So we welcomed the ANC leadership. And that gave us so much strength and courage. We knew that we were also going home. But to receive them symbolically was an important political achievement for us. So we gained strength from that. And so we received stories about, people who had left home asking, Dad, what happened? Where's my little sister? So we reminisced about the past. And so Tata and Mama came to our house in Lusaka. We organized dinner for them. And we slept in the wee hours of the morning. We talked the whole afternoon, the whole evening, and to catch up with the stories. And they, of course, wanted to know how we were. And I was there with my son. He was a baby then. And so it was a nice family reunion.
Which son are you talking about?
He Mlungisi.
Can I check with you? Your parents came. Part of the South African ANC leadership, the internal. Tata Sisulu came out of prison after more than 25 years spending there. You now meeting them for the first time after such a long period. What went through you? What I can imagine you seeing one's parents after so many brutal years of apartheid. You sometimes don't know exactly what their state of health is. They don't know what your state of health is. It's just the messages they're getting. What happened to Max Sisulu at that moment? Because there are different stories about how others managed to interact with their own parents when their parents also came as part of the leadership that came to visit in Lusaka. What went through you? How did you in particular experience that specific moment?
Well, my wife and I were, of course, very ecstatic. I hadn't seen my parents in a long while. And to see them, and though old, but they're still, healthy, very energetic, with very sharp minds, very good memories. So it was nice to look back from where we come from, and also to look forward to say, what next? We have achieved what we wanted to achieve.
Did you cry when you saw your parents?
No.
Were you happy? Did you smile? Were you sad?
No, I was very happy. I hugged them and kissed them. No.
How did you express your happiness?
Well, the way all Africans express their happiness, you hug and kiss and dance. Out of happiness, yes. No, crying was not part of my makeup. I never cried, not out of sorrow or happiness. But yes, seeing one's parents after so many years, it's just an experience that is difficult to explain. Very, very emotional moment.
How did the others experience them seeing their own parents who are tried and tested, imprisoned, brutalized through the apartheid prison system? How did they experience seeing their parents also for the first time?
Well, the same emotion, happiness, relief that the parents are still alive, that they were not killed by apartheid, and also a show that your beliefs cannot be destroyed. We knew we were going to be free. We're not quite sure when that was going to happen, but we knew we were going to be free. But when you see that freedom that you fought for, that your colleagues died for, that some of us nearly died for. I was, nearly killed in a bomb blast in Lusaka that killed JD, the chief rep. My parents were happy to see that I'm alive because they were told that the son is dead. They were happy to see that I'm alive and well. But most important, that the spirit of no surrender was still there. We were going to fight until we win. And so we shared those moments of happiness. We also shared some moments of sadness because they came with stories about, what's happened, so-and-so passed away, so-and-so, was killed. So it was, joy, but also mixed a bit with sadness. That some of our members of the family had died. But most important for us is that majority of members of the family were alive. My brothers, my sisters, my parents, my aunts. So that was a wonderful feeling.
Can you speak about that spirit of no surrender? Was there an element of surrendering during the negotiations, from moving from an apartheid state to a negotiated settlement to where we are now as a constitutional democracy? Was that spirit of surrender, no surrender, carried through in all parts of the constitutional negotiation? With hindsight, if you look back at it.
Well, one thing we were clear about when we took the oath of Mkhonto Caesar was that we would not surrender, we'd rather die than surrender. So it was not something that we're going to be debating. And a lot of people had died already for their rights to life, to freedom. And therefore we had continued the struggle until it was won. Struggles take different forms at different times. Surrender means there's no struggle whatsoever. You hand over. There was no way we could hand over and surrender everything. Individuals might surrender, which some of them did. They went over to the enemy and surrendered. Mthembu sold out, he surrendered and sold out. But the vast majority of the oppressed people didn't surrender, they didn't sell out. They had this spirit that we will continue until we win. And that spirit continues even today. We know we've won the freedom, but we haven't got that economic power as yet. So we're not going to surrender that too. There's now a different kind of struggle under different conditions, peaceful conditions, but it's a struggle for socio-economic justice, socio-economic change, and change for the vast majority of the people. Again, there can't be surrender of that struggle for a better life. The struggle for a better life will continue until we all reach a better life for all, not just for individuals.
Your political party went through a number of structural changes, tensions over the last 100 years. Which one of those difficulties stands out in your memory as a lesson to the present? Because there was Morogoro, there was the whole issue around the Makawanis and the PAC, and there were more than that. Which one stands out for you before 94 as a strategic lesson for ANC today?
For me, growing up in the struggle, the first important one for me was the clip down, the Congress of the People, with young pioneers then. And for us it was symbolic. So many people, hundreds of people, coming to do one thing, to say this is what we were fighting for, to drop the Freedom Charter. So for me, it was an important part of my life to be part of that Freedom Charter, formation of the Freedom Charter. And of course, Tumanokwe and Dad were banned, but we knew where they were because we'd go and periodically give reports about who's speaking now, how many people, which provinces are attending, which branches. So we knew where they were and kept giving them reports. I would go, and then one of my other, friends would go and give reports because the car wasn't, in one place. But that was the important part of it. And being part of history, and, very, even later life, it was important that we're part of history, part of shaping the future. So that's what drove us constantly. And being in part of Mkhonto overseas, we're nearly dying in the struggle. I knew that, one day we'll be free, even if I'm dead, but freedom will come. And we knew it was going to come in our lifetime. That's what we're fighting for. So we were moved by the heroism of our people. We were moved by the determination of our people. But most important, we are also moved by the historical events that were taking place throughout Southern Africa. Mozambique, liberation of Mozambique, Angola, So we were part of that history which shaped the region or the African continent.
So Kliptown stands out as an important event.
Yeah.
Are there any others that...
Oh yeah. Kliptown is an important event of the Freedom Charter, but also Soweto uprising, young people massacred.
And the fractures inside the ANC?
Well, yes, in any struggle there would be tensions, and there would also be agreements and disagreements, especially when it's a long struggle. Yeah. Took so many years and many years of sacrifice, because people were actually not paid, and people had families, and also and some of the your families was being killed in South Africa. So you had all those emotions.
And the impatience that comes with it.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. The pain, the impatience, the anger, and also the conditions were not exactly rosy conditions. They were very difficult conditions. And not everybody could stand them. Other people just left, deserted basically.
Your father, the late Walter Sisulu, is considered one of the key leaders. In fact, in many people's eyes, is the one that kept, the glue that kept the ANC together during the early years with Mandela and others when OR Tambo was moving into exile. And then people speak about Walter Sisulu's influential role on Mandela. How do you guys experience that? Do you have a view on that? Because it seems to me it's one of the untold stories. It comes about in bits and pieces, but it's very thin. Why is that?
Well, first, he was the Secretary General of the ANC. And the Secretary General, you are the one that has to keep the organization together. You become the glue. He was a committed person, Secretary General of the ANC. And of course, unpaid. Sometimes you got something, but more often than not, the ANC had no money. So the person who kept us alive was my mom as a nurse. But my dad kept on because it was his conviction that freedom is going to come. And Secretary General, he had a role to play. So he was the one who formed the ANC, shaped the ANC, together with people like Duma Nokwe at the time, before he left for exile. Forming of Masupatsila and all that was Duma's idea and Tata's idea, because they got this when they traveled Eastern Europe at the time. And so we also were part of a growing African movement, because African countries became free, starting with Ghana. And so we saw that light that, Africa is now beginning to move. We're encouraged by that. And what Tata and Dumanok and others did was simply to emphasize that we also need to liberate ourselves. We are our own liberators. Nobody was going to come and liberate us. You are your own liberator. In this case, South Africans were our own liberators. And many people were prepared to die. That's why they had the slogan, "I'm a volunteer." Volunteers were ready to die for their beliefs. And so that was part of the struggle. Yes, Tata played an important part because he was Secretary General for a long time. contributed a lot. And his vision, he had a very profound vision of the future. He knew the past, he lived the present, but he had this vision about what kind of South Africa we wanted, which is why there was this clip down about shaping the future with the people. What kind of society do we want? We, the people of South Africa, all those parts of the Freedom Charter. So we're all moved by the commitment, we're all moved by that spirit of no surrender, all moved by the determination that we shall one day win, which we did. And of course, Tata is an unsung hero. He never praised himself. And Mama never praised herself too. But here I must say, also congratulate my wife Eleanor for writing the book about Mama and Tata, so that, a lot of people could learn about them, and a lot of us can continue to learn from them, although they are gone.
Dennis Goldberg made a point in an interview that we had with him that Tata Walter Sisulu made a strategic choice of his humanity, of his own humanity. He decided that he will not be allowed allow the apartheid government to determine what race group he is. So he decided that he will be an African, and with that came a particular struggle for him, and not be classified any other than an African, not wanting to be classified a colored person or a mixed race person. How did your family experience that? I mean, you were not there at the time, but surely that has had a carry-through effect in terms of how the family was dealt with by the security police. That strategic choice that he made as a human being.
Yes, he made a choice that he didn't want to be classified as a colored, although in South African terms he was a colored. But he saw himself as an African, which he was.
Half part in terms of...
Well, we always saw ourselves as Africans in Africa. And so he also grew up in the Transkei under the leadership of his uncles. And so he grew up in that environment of the Transkei. He didn't see himself as separate and different. He ate what they ate, the conditions were the same. And so his culture was Xhosa culture. Everything about him was Xhosa, except the color of the skin. But everything was Xhosa. And which is why he also volunteered to go to the mines when he was a young man. But they refused him. Said, no, you're too young, etc. Because he saw himself as part of a whole. He didn't see himself as separate and different. Although under apartheid he would have had, some privileges. But his conviction was that he is part of the oppressed, and he wants to continue to fight for the freedom of all, not for the freedom of a few, but the freedom for all.
Was that suicidal, politically speaking?
Not really. I mean, he became a very popular Secretary General. It was not suicidal, but it was a political choice, a political decision. There comes a time when people have to take difficult decisions. Joining Umkhonto we was not an easy decision. We knew you would die, and many people died. But it was a decision that had to be taken. You had to choose between right and wrong. And people made those choices. And Tata's choice was made easy for him because he grew up in a wonderful environment, loved environment.
You're saying, sorry, go on?
No.
Through life, and especially given the South African history, the South African political context, socio-economic context, but also given the role that your family played and that you played in it during transition and negotiations. Were there difficult choices made during negotiations?
In any negotiation, you're not going to get all that you want. Negotiations are give and take. So clearly there would be some compromises in a give and take in any negotiations. So clearly in the process of negotiations, yes, there were compromises that were made. And some people got angry and left the ANC because of the compromises. But looking back, what other real options were there? Because in any struggle, there comes a time when you have to decide which is the best way forward. And we, as the oldest liberation movement in Africa, had to make a choice, for, not just for our country, but for the vision of Africa. And compromises come, and so we need to make sure that they are not going to derail the struggle, but it's a compromise that might be temporary in order to achieve some result, better results the following day or tomorrow. So yes, compromises are part of the struggle.
One of the key difficult choices that has been in the newspapers over the last 2-3 years and of late is the complexity in choices that needs to be made. But those choices also informed by conditions of information, that's in the material conditions that you find yourself in. Being Speaker of the House, you had to make certain choices about a number of things. How did you approach that?
Well, you know, Parliament and all parliaments are guided and governed by rules. And these are the rules that we ourselves made. So first and foremost, if you're a speaker, then the rules are important. You can't change them to suit yourself. So you make sure that you abide by the rules, and everybody does abide by the rules. The second thing is you need to be firm, but also fair. Be firm, but be fair too. So when you are the speaker, you're not the speaker of the ANC, you're speaker of parliament. And therefore you allow other parties an opportunity, and you can't suppress them. You allow them, you give them as much space as the others. And sometimes you give them a bit more, because they're a minority party. And you want parliament to be a parliament of all the people of the country. So you want the small parties, their voice to be heard. You don't say because the small party must have a small voice. It must have an equal voice. Because it's the members of parliament, and they've got a right to express themselves. So you open opportunities for all, which is why we also ran training programs for members of parliament, because we believe that the more you know, the better you do. We started training programs. We went to European Parliament, and they also gave us some money. We started the training of people at VETS. We started that from Parliament. And even today, you have lots of young people from Parliament studying different universities, because it opens up opportunities for them, but also it's part of democracy. So Parliament has to play a role of not just lawmaking, but also make sure that it opens up opportunities for the people of the country. So parliaments are there to ensure that you abide by the rules, and everybody does, but also parliaments are a place of people to learn, a place of people to express themselves.
To date, you're the only black South African male that has been the Speaker of Parliament, sitting in the seat of your predecessors as females. Is there a gender change important in that role? Or is it just because your outlook is different to the others that were sitting in that seat before you?
Well, the speakers actually are chosen, elected by the party. I mean, you don't choose yourself to be a speaker. It's the party that decides who's going to be the speaker. Friends, I was the first speaker from the democratic movement, and we made a deliberate choice that it had to be a woman. It was symbolic that it's new parliament. In the past, all speakers were male under apartheid, white males. So under new dispensation, it had to be a female, not a white female, but a black female, in this case, an Indian woman. So that was an important part of it, the symbolism of it. And I think it was a wise decision. And Comrade Freni played an important role as being the first speaker of a democratic parliament. And so, looking back, we think she's played a role, and we continue to regard her as an important leader, not just of the ANC, but of the country. She's frail now, but we still hold her in high regard.
You made two choices amongst the many choices that you've made as the Speaker of Parliament, you made many hard decisions and choices in the interest of the functioning of South Africa's parliamentary democracy. Yeah. There are two decisions that seems to stand out during your period. The one is to allow a debate on Nkandla, which was about the security upgrades at the current President Zuma's house. The other was to approve an ad hoc committee to deal with the matter. Both these matters also find itself in the South African judicial system, in the courts. What influenced you to make those decisions?
Well, first, the rules of parliament. The other one was in the long-term interest, because had we followed that proposal of ad hoc committee, we might have not gone down this route where we are now, find ourselves in this problem. Because that was the best and only solution, an ad hoc committee, parliamentary ad hoc committee. Because you can't keep the secret. Because if you use taxpayers' money, you've got to account for that. And therefore it was common sense that you needed to find a mechanism that was going to do two things. Where, first, you should be on the right side of the law, your own law. Secondly, it would have enabled the house, the building of the house, to continue, but managed differently. Because nobody said it can't be built, you can't build a house for the president or contribute, but it should have been managed differently. You would not have ended up with what we're having now. It's a worst case scenario. Ad hoc committee was the best possible scenario. It would have saved lots of people a lot of embarrassment, saved us a lot of money as a nation, but the principle of justice would also have been protected, and the importance of the institutions of democracy like parliament would have been protected. Because once you destroy the institutions that we created of democracy, then clearly you're destroying the foundations of our democracy and freedom. So, we nearly died for freedom. Why do we destroy it after democracy? It doesn't make sense. And the institution of parliament must stand there and outlive us. It must be a beacon of hope for future generations. People must have faith in the institution of parliament. But once you destroy that confidence, you're destroying not just the hopes and aspirations of the people, but also our common goals and future. So there are short-term gains that people make, but the long-term gain is the most important one, gain for everybody. And why destroy an important institution of democracy because of a house? Really.
As the leader of one powerful branch of our constitutional democracy, which is Parliament, and the other two is the executive, which is where the president constitutionally is the head of the executive, and then you have the constitutional court as the chief justice. Given that particular incident on Nkandla and the ad hoc committee and the parliamentary debate and the stuff landing in the in the high court, were there opportunities for you as the Speaker of the House, not in the party but as the Speaker of the House, to interact directly with the head of the executive as the president on this matter? Or was the separation of powers between the two branches much more important than the relationship management between the executive and Parliament?
Well, these are two separate things. I mean, we had a relationship with the president. He was president of my organization, and I served on the NEC, and so we had that relationship. But also there is a separation of power between the three spheres of government, and that has to be respected. Which is why I felt that Parliament must also assert its authority, and this is the way Parliament should work. Because Parliament is not a subsidiary of something. Parliament is an important institution of democracy. So that was my belief, and this is what the Constitution says. So that's why I proposed what I proposed. They finally came back to it, but a bit late.
And the relationship between the House, between the office of the Speaker of Parliament, relative to the office of the presidency, how was that managed during your time? And what role did the leader of government play in that, who is the deputy president at the time?
Well, the meetings where, the three arms of government sit and discuss issues. Masangu and myself, Sangu was in the NCOP, National Council of Provinces, would go and visit the president and discuss issues with him. But we also had our own bilaterals with the judiciary. In fact, we had a very good relations with the judiciary. So we had good relations with the judiciary, and also we had good relations with government, because that's what the Constitution says. But also, for any of the houses to function, there has to be a working relationship between the three arms of government. And this has to be managed in terms of the rules, not in terms of my wishes or anybody else's wishes, in terms of the rules. So that's how parliaments function or should function.
Are there fractures in the relationship from your perspective, with hindsight, in the relationship between Parliament, judiciary and the executive currently?
Well, I'm not sure if there is any, how it's working now. But it's clear that the judiciary is also wanted to assert its authority, which they did. It's clear that Parliament is also having some problems. As you watch television, you can see those difficulties. And clearly the country itself is concerned about the way things are going. So yes, there is an issue about managing the processes and also the outcomes of these processes.
Based on your own experience and knowledge, what would you advise in terms of the relationship management between Parliament and the judiciary and Parliament and the executive? As a former speaker, what advice would you be giving, without prejudice, of course?
Well, the advice is follow the Constitution. These things are outlined in the Constitution. We don't have to go and look for new rules. They're outlined in the Constitution. It's also stated in the rules of Parliament. And the relationship between the three arms of state is there in the Constitution.
Are you a constitutionalist?
No, I'm not. I'm a politician.
But why the Constitution? Why do you look for refuge in the Constitution?
Well, because the relationship of the three arms of state is in any kind is governed by the Constitution. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land. So it can't be governed by the law of the judiciary or law of Parliament. It's governed by the Constitution. All of us are bound by the Constitution, which is why we take oath on the Constitution. It's a supreme law of the land. And then the other relationships governed by the Constitution, influenced by the Constitution, about how the three arms of state can work. We had meetings with the judiciary. Members of Parliament sit on appointing magistrates and judges. It's there in the law. And also discussions between the president or presidency and the two arms of state is there, So it's not new. It's not new. It started with Mandela, and Thabo Mbeki, Zuma now, and I'm sure even the future presidents will be governed by those rules. Rules that we ourselves put together, the rules of Parliament, the Constitution itself.
Many of your political peers, either serving with you in the African National Congress, NEC, National Executive Committee, or the National Working Committee, and Parliament, and some of that you've, over your years, more than 50 years of interaction politically on organizational structures, has got particular reflections on the current leadership of the Economic Freedom Front, and in particular on the disciplinary to expelling, suspension to expelling of members of the Economic Freedom Front. They were members of the ANC, it's the ANC Youth League.
Okay.
If you look back, what was your view about that youth tension and conflict? Julius Malema, Floyd Shivambu, and others' disciplinary hearing. Was there opportunities to handle it differently, or was the outcome appropriate?
Well, that was not the Economic Freedom Front. Those were individuals who expelled from the ANC, were members of the ANC Youth League. And they were expelled from the ANC. So that's really water under the bridge now. Subsequent to expulsion, of course, they formed the Economic Freedom Front. And so, which is where we are today. It's there, it's a reality. Would it have been there had they not been expelled? I don't know, maybe other people would have formed other parties. So South Africa is a democracy and people can form their parties. Some parties were formed and they failed. COPE is not doing coping right now. So but again, it came out of the ANC. And so did the Freedom Front, Economic Freedom Front, coming out of the ANC. And so did the PAC come out of the ANC in the past.
But given that they were members of the ANC Youth League, were there potential at the time, potentially different approaches to have managed the situation? Or was it a clear cut, it's a disciplinary hearing? For instance, Galema was arguing that the disciplinary option should have been the last option. There should have been other ways of dealing with the particular problem at the time, given that was members of the youth of the ANC. And the idea that the youth always, invariably, are not always disciplined. And they always challenge the status quo. Whether it's appropriate or not is not the question. Is, were there any other ways to look at this? Because you've got another set of youth coming through. That, because every generation has got its own struggle. And as a result, it's part of the growth of a political party, but also the maturity of its ability to handle such a situation that is challenging. And my question is, you in particular, I'm not asking the party, what is your thoughts on that particular complexity of dealing with a voice? Remember, your own father, the late Walter Sisulu, Nelson Mandela, or Tambo, circumstances were different, but there were also youth that were challenging the status quo that Chief Albert Lutuli wanted to maintain at a given time. So if you look back,
you know, hindsight is an exact science. No, hindsight, everything with hindsight. Could it have been done differently? I'm not sure. I don't know whether it could have been done differently. Part of the problem is that this is the reality we are faced with now. Anything could have been done differently, but the reality is that this is where we are now. The question is, what next? What's going to happen? How do you manage the process going forward? Decisions have been taken, right or wrong, with consequences. Any decision you take has consequences. And so we now know the consequence of any decision taken. So the question is, how do you manage it going forward? And clearly, it has to be managed, because it's disrupting not just the institutions of parliament and etc., but it's also creating instability. So clearly there is a need to manage it, but can it still be managed? I don't know. I don't know. What it has done, of course, is to give EFF visibility. It's given it some power. And then also they've been able to go to the Constitutional Court and win. So they are now a reality and also a force that has to be contended with. So the question is, going forward, how you manage the process going forward.
Is Parliament in trouble? Because when one looks at television broadcasting of parliamentary sessions, the National Assembly in particular, but also when it comes to the joint sittings of the two houses of Parliament, it seems to me from the outside looking in that the current Parliament is in real trouble. Is that a incorrect or correct look at it? And why?
Well, Parliament is experiencing lots of problems currently, yes. And some of them are self-inflicted. You now have a situation where all parties are going to use Parliament for their own electioneering purposes now. All parties, small, big, whatever, are going to use. So Parliament is now a contested terrain, like most parliaments. So it's not just around legislation. It's around the politics. It's around power, political power. In other countries, they even fight physically. And with us, of course, now it's televised. So, hey, there's a lot of power there, you know. So it's an instrument also of gaining political power. It's part of electioneering.
So Parliament becomes the platform for
Yeah.
future electioneering.
Yeah, of course.
To explain that?
Well, the visibility of parties in Parliament is televised. So parties in Parliament are not just talking to issues of Parliament, they're talking to the electorate out there. You know, if these were not televised, maybe the antics of Julius Malimendi's party would not be known. You know, now the antics are known, it's televised, it's public knowledge. And as they say, knowledge is power, and people are saying, so this is the way to go. Under apartheid, nobody knew what was happening in Parliament because it was their Parliament. But today, what happens in Parliament, everybody knows because it's open now to the public. And politics is always contested terrain.
The last two questions to you is, if you had the opportunity to sit with the current Speaker of Parliament in a private environment, what would be the two points of advice you would give her? 3 points of advice you would give her?
Follow the rules.
So a rule-bound system.
It is. That's what parliaments are.
And the second one?
Well, I don't know if there's a second one, but the main one is just follow the rules. Which is what parliament's all about. And when I was Speaker, of course, I also had the opportunity to have discussions with all parties one-on-one. I should invite them to my office, sometimes invite them to tea or lunch. I had sessions with Gaja Telezi on one-on-one. I had sessions with the DA. The person now who's in, who won Port Elizabeth, what's his name?
True.
Yeah, he used to come to my office. Sessions with him. I had sessions with all Mishwe. I used to invite them to one-on-one to the office. Say, what are the issues? What do you think?
But isn't the main problem of Parliament its proportional representation, where the majority always gets obviously more airtime to air their views relative to the minorities? And as a result, the proportional representation system, there's almost like an indirect forcing the majority to listen to the minority, even if the minority sometimes only have 3 parliamentarians in a whole scheme of 400 parliamentarians. Isn't that the core of Parliament's problem?
No, I don't think so. I mean, democracy can't be the core of a problem. That's democracy. That's what we chose, you know. So you can't change that. So that's democracy in action. And democracy has got its own problems, pros and cons, but that's the nature of democracy. But the issue here is not proportional representation, it's how you manage these issues. And things can be managed differently. I mean, there are many countries that have a system of proportional representation, and they don't seem to have some of the problems we have. And also proportional representation didn't start now. We've had it since 94. So we never had some of these problems in 94. So that's not the issue. It's how you manage relations and how you manage the issues and problems.
Last question is, what would you advise the South African public and young people who want to become parliamentarians, representatives of the people in parliament?
Well, I would certainly encourage them. We would want, members of parliament to be the true representative of the people, which means the quality of representation also has to improve, which is why we started with the training programs for members of parliament, all members of parliament, not just of a particular party. So the quality of representation must improve. The quality of debate also has to improve. Parliaments by nature would be adversarial, but there comes a time when actually there needs to be issues that are of common concern. Poverty is one of them. Unemployment is another. Inequality is another. So there can't be differences there. We all agree. The question, how do you manage it? How do you grow the economy? That's what we need. So you need parliament to be a platform for debate and discussion, but also chart the way forward. High levels of unemployment, poverty, etc., crime. So those are issues that need to be debated and discussed, and the way forward charted. In 94, that's where we started about the role of parliament in society. We also drew the democratic constitution, one of the best in the world, through parliament. Discussions and disagreements will always be, that's the nature of democracy. Democracy does not mean you agree on everything with everybody. But once you agree on something, you go together and do it.
Do you think that your representatives in parliament across the floor has a grasp on the difference, but also the complementary role of being a public representatives or political party representative, and the role of them in parliament as legislators? Do you think there's still a classical disjuncture between the two, or is it coming together in a much more forceful and what the Constitution requires?
Well, since the first parliament, we emphasized the issue of accountability, being responsible, but also being representative of the people. That's why we had programs called Bringing People to Parliament, Taking Parliament to the People, so that those are not seen as separate. You are a representative of the people. You need also to be able to listen to the people. And so that has to continue. To be a true representative of the people, it means you listen to them. And also you deliver on the promises you make to the people. Otherwise, the people will vote you out. As simple as that. So the incentive is that if you want to stay on, deliver on the promises made.
Deliver
on the promises made.
Deliver legislation, deliver...
Legislation is one way, it's one tiny bit. But if you've got high levels of unemployment, Parliament can't be indifferent to that. So there has to be some kind of solution. And the economy is one, it's our common economy. And the economy has to be such that it delivers also on the needs of the people. And Parliament is central in that. So Parliament is not separate from the people nor from the executive, but it's an instrument of the people. Parliament are instruments of people. So Parliament can be and should be a vehicle for change for the better. In this case, socio-economic improvement in the lives of the people.
Great. Max Sisulu, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Professor.